With that, I'll turn it over to our dear friend David Valente. Thanks, sir.
All right, thank you, Mike. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is David Valente, and our guest is Barbara Smith Warner with the National Vote at Home Institute. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. Um, let's do a little bit of background on you. You are a former state representative in from the state of Oregon before you joined the National Vote at Home Institute. You have some experience in actually getting voted home passed in the state of Oregon. So talk about your background with when it comes to the legislature and your work with vote at home.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Great to see you all. Great to be here with you. I love any and every opportunity to talk about voting at home because to me it is like it's the most transformative thing we can do to save and support democracy and to really center voters in voting. Right? Like if you believe that voting is a right, then, and not everybody does, to be clear, there are plenty of folks who believe it's a privilege, that it should be earned. And that goes back to the long history in this country of voter disenfranchisement, whether it was when the founders decided that only white men over 21 with who owned land could vote, over time to poll taxes, to literacy tests, all the things. But there are plenty of folks who don't think
She
it should be
settled
easy to
in.
vote. They think it should be,
And look at
be
the
hard.
Oriole on the grapevine.
Um, oh, there we go. I was just going to mute
That
that
was
person.
Paul.
Um, we all do it. But voting at home, it really centers the voter. So if you believe that voting is a right, you should want it to be as easy as possible. And there's nothing easy. Every registered voter a ballot. So, but yeah, to take a couple steps back. So I'm from Oregon, and Oregon is where we were the first state to go full universal vote at home. We, as a little experiment, back in the 90s, us and Washington and a couple other Western states had started to do some experimenting with vote at home, where we let counties run specific elections by mailing everybody a ballot rather than having to set up polling places and all that stuff. And then in a big, the big test case was in late 95, early 96, a guy named Phil Kiesling, Secretary of State of Oregon at the time, our board chair to this day, now at National Vote at Home. Phil was the Secretary of State, and there was a special U.S. Senate election. We had a guy resign from the U.S. Senate, and we replace our U.S. senators in Oregon with special elections. So there was and it was a really weird time. It was October of 95 is when he resigned. So the Secretary of State who had helped to pass a bill saying that not only could like localities do elections via vote by mail, but that special elections could be held that way. So in a really pretty big deal, he ran the first federal election, all vote by mail, as we called it at that time, and both the primary and the general election, every active registered voter was mailed a ballot. They returned it for the primary and then for the general. And that just got people so much more used to it. And it was so successful and so much less expensive administratively that then Phil was then involved in a ballot measure that was put on the ballot in 1998 to move Oregon to all universal vote at home. And it was passed. And so we are now in year 24 of doing all our elections, vote, we mail a ballot to every registered voter. I was actually involved working with the Letter Carriers Union at the time of that special election. So was very involved. We and the letter carriers to this day, still big supporters of voting by mail and voting at home. And so we worked closely with Phil at the time to do PSAs, all that good stuff. And so over the years, I ended up doing more work in Oregon, becoming elected. I got elected to the legislature, started serving in 2014. So I was involved in our automatic, now we were already obviously vote by mail then, but I was involved in helping to pass automatic voter registration in 2015. And then a couple years later, we have kind of continued to expand and tweak the vote by mail here in Oregon. So we've got prepaid postage, so that you don't have to worry about dropping a stamp in your putting a stamp on your ballot. And our deadline is postmarked by Election Day, so you have a little bit of lag time there for the ballots to come in. So that's probably more than you wanted to know about the Oregon history of it. But organizationally, we were started in 2018 when there were only 3 states that were full voted home, and that was Oregon, Washington, and I really should know the third one, Colorado, sorry. So it was just Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and now 6 years later, partially, you know, with a lot of help from the pandemic, where more states use this, as you discussed. You know, the people was very involved in this. So many folks were involved in this in 2020 of providing this safer, more accessible way to vote. So now you've got 8 states that automatically send a ballot to every voter, and 26 states where you can get a ballot for any reason, 26 more, so no excuse required. So we're down to only 14 states representing less than 25% of the voting population that still require an excuse to vote at home.
Yeah, I believe my state still requires an excuse, but
I believe you do.
yeah. So now talk about, you have left the legislature. You are now the executive director of the National Vote at Home Institute. How did that come about? And talk about the National Vote at Home Institute and its mission and what you're working on.
Yeah. So I served in the legislature for, as I said, for 9 years. I was the majority leader for the last 3 years, which coincided with the pandemic. I got elected as majority leader about 8 months before the pandemic took hold in March of 2020. And that was a lot. It was quite an intense year. We normally in the Oregon legislature, we serve, you're elected for a 2-year cycle. There's a 6-month session in the first year and a 6-week session in the second year. Instead, in 2020, we had 5 special sessions. The first 2 to cut budgets, the next 3 to increase budgets, as you know, as kind of everybody's finances and fortunes went all over the place without prediction. But after that, I was majority leader through the 2021 session, and then decided in 2022 not to run again, mostly because I had a really great time, really enjoyed being a legislator, and was just done. Thought it was time for me to do something else, and felt like I had kind of done for democracy that I could at the state level, and wasn't sure what I was going to do next. And then a friend sent me the job posting for the Vote at Home Institute, and I reached out to Phil again and was like, Phil, it's been a minute, but let's talk about this organization. And it was just such a perfect combination of the democracy focus, my letter carrier background, having worked as a legislator to expand the access to voting at home. And it's been a year and a half. I started in March of 2023. And basically what our mission is to, very simply, to expand voters' access to, use of, and confidence in voting at home. Our ideal, you know, our gold standard is universal vote at home states such as Oregon, and the other 7 states in DC, where every eligible voter, every active registered voter, is automatically mailed a ballot for every election 2 to 3 weeks before. They have plenty of time to review it, turn it in, whether it's mailing it back or bringing it back in person. There's a ballot tracking system so that you know when your ballot has been received and counted, and a ballot curing process where if there is a problem, your signature doesn't match, or you forgot to date it, or whatever it is, you are contacted and given the ability to fix that. So that's our ideal. But we also know that that's not realistic. Every state, you know, folks who think that there is one electoral system in this country are sadly mistaken. There are at least 51, one for each of the 50 states in DC. Plus, I would argue that that some of the territories would say, oh, but Puerto Rico has one and Virgin Islands have one. Every state runs its own election system. And so that means they have different rules and regulations about how that work. So we are realistic, and we are not a one size fits all. We're not like, we couldn't, maybe if we could wave a wand and say, okay, everybody's going to vote at home, it's going to be an all, you know, everybody's going to automatically get delivered a ballot. Maybe we would, but we can't. And so we are realistic and try to meet each state where it's at and make some progress. So I am gonna share my screen for a second, just to give everybody kind of a sense of where all the states are right now. So I'll wait until it pops up. There we go. And unfortunately, thank you, technology. I cannot quite get everything to fit on the screen at once. So I'll start with this. So these are the policies about mail ballots for every state. So that you can see the title on there and you can see the map key for a minute. But I'm going to try to scoot it down so you can actually read the descriptions there, as well as looking at all the maps. So if you look at this map, the purple states are those full voted home states, all those states that automatically send every voter a ballot for every election. And then at the other end are what we consider kind of the furthest from voter access to mail ballots. And those are the gray states. Those are the excuse required. In those 14 states, you need a specific legal excuse to even ask for a mail ballot. And in some states, it's in the list is in the Constitution. In some states, it's in statute. And it varies from state to state. A couple of my favorites, I can't help but point out, are in Mississippi, where if you are running for office, that's a valid reason. In many of those states, age is a reason. 60 or 65, you are automatically qualified because apparently younger people are not trustworthy enough to get mail ballots. And then there is my all-time favorite, my second favorite, which is in New Hampshire. If there is a National Weather Service declared weather emergency within 24 hours of the election, then you can. Now, how that's going to happen and then you get a mail ballot, I do not know, but it's one of their reasons. It's wackadoodle. But truly my all-time favorite, which is the state of Indiana, where if you are a registered sex offender, you can vote at home. That is a valid excuse. So
wow.
So those are your two extremes: the purple states, full vote at home; the gray states, excuse still required. Now, those blue and green states in the middle are really the key. And for folks who are figuring out, okay, what can I do to increase turnout? What can I do to make sure that people vote this year and every year? Those green and blue states are really your sweet spot. The green states are states where no excuse is required in order to get a mail ballot and to vote at home. But you have to re-request that ballot over and over again. And a couple of them, okay, maybe you can go for a calendar year, but you still have to repeatedly request it. The blue states are what we call single sign up and what many people think of as permanent absentee. In those states, you can sign up one time and automatically get your ballot. So that's kind of the next best thing to the full vote at home states, are those single sign up states where you can indeed sign up once. I'll point out a couple highlights in those blue states, in those single sign-up states. Both Arizona and Montana, well over 70% of their voters are voted home. They voted home already. So really significant usage. Michigan, which just switched to single sign-up in this last year. Even before that, they had 40% of their folks voting at home. So that's kind of the range of ways that you can vote at home. And so what we do, like our kind of long-term work, is to, increase voters' access to, use of, and confidence in. And so that's part of why we really promote ballot tracking and ballot curing, so that people are confident in their voting. They know where it is in the process. And then at the state level, we work to move those excuse required states to no excuse, and then move the no excuse states to single sign up, and then move the single sign up states to full vote at home. So that's kind of the process we go by. There's some other things we'll do. Like in some states, we work to allow, right now, Illinois, there's a couple different, both legislators and county clerks who are they're not sure they can get to full vote at home, but they do want to allow counties to run special elections, all voting at home, which is a way that Oregon and Washington both got to universal vote at home. So there's lots of different options you can do in those states, but that's really what we work on. Is like I said, we try to meet each state where it is, and work with them to make progress to greater access.
Awesome. Now, I'm sure most of the people here are familiar with voting at home and fans of voting at home, but go through a couple of reasons why vote at home is superior to showing up on election day, walking in and casting your vote in at a ballot box.
Amen. I would say really the biggest advantage is that it centers the voter in the process. So whether you have early voting or just one day in person, you as the voter still have to go out and get your vote. You have to go and access your vote. So if you have irregular hours, or if you have kids you have to take care of, or if you're sick, or if there's long lines because because elections are underfunded in most states, all of those things mean you have to make the effort and go out and seek out your right to vote, which is indeed quite foundational to our democracy. Voting at home puts the voter in the center, and it makes it the government's job to send all of us our ballot. So when you're voting at home, your ballot's coming to you. You are centered in the process. You have the safety and security of voting at home. I'm at my dining room table right now. This is where I vote. We have our kids come and sit with us. We look up we look up races that we aren't familiar with. If you're a believer in ranked choice voting, right? If you're a supporter of that, you want people to be ranked choice voting when they're sitting at their table, can figure it out, can look up different people and figuring out their rankings. So that really is the primary. I mean, to me, that's like the number one reason that is just head and shoulders above all the rest, is that your ballot comes to you. You have the safety and security of doing it at home. You have a longer period of time to get it done, and you have those variety of ways to return it: in the mail, in person, through a Dropbox, whatever it is. Yeah, and I'm not even sure I would give a number 2, because that kind of is the best reason, and it encompasses so much of that. But all the things that does, not having to worry about having the day off, bad weather, particularly if you're in New Hampshire, lines at the polls, the machines going, something going wrong with the machines, whatever it is. All of that is just goes away when you are voting at home.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if you want your voters to be informed, giving them the opportunity, because I always liken going to the ballot box, going to the election center and giving your vote, almost like a test. You have to remember. I mean, we all know, we have a good idea who we're going to vote for president and for Senate, but when it comes to all those down ballot races, a lot of times you just, especially first time voters, don't know that there are 50 different offices going up for election in this general election. So it gives you a good chance to research it.
We vote on people for the East Multnomah Soil and Water District. And I see that on my ballot, and I'm like, okay, I don't know who these folks are. And the ability to look them up and make those more informed decisions. And if you are, if you are involved in more local politics, just that ability to really have more informed voters that are going further down the ballot is a huge, huge advantage.
Absolutely. So let's talk about what's coming up for 2024 as far as the change in status for this election coming up.
Yeah, basically, so right now I mean, there has not been a lot of change this year. I would say most of the change has been states that already make it pretty hard in those excuse required states trying to make it harder. They're threatened, folks who are threatened by making voting easier, as it should be. So you have a couple states that this year, Alabama and Louisiana, both this year, made it a felony to give someone an application for a mail ballot without them requesting it first, which is just as crazy as it sounds. So yeah, so there's that. Yes, there are already excuse required states, and so it's already hard, but the extent to which they go to make it harder is just shocking. Happily, there are a number of folks that have been pushing back in lawsuits. They also are, a number of states try to criminalize any assistance with your mail ballot, which folks, disabled folks, that's a huge impact for them, right? That inability to do that. So there's a lot of stuff like that. But then let's take North Carolina. So in North Carolina, I'm sure you all are familiar with how much they've been working over the last few years to make it harder to vote in North Carolina. Well, the only thing that it's harder to do than voting in person in North Carolina is to vote at home in North Carolina. Number one, they've made it so you have to have a photocopy of your you have to have a photocopy of your license that you send in with the application for the mail ballot. Then when the mail ballot comes and you fill it out, you then have to get either 2 witnesses or a notary to sign your ballot, to attest that it was you that did that. But in case that weren't enough, the North Carolina legislature last year, and then they passed a pilot project to pick 10 counties to do signature verification on those ballots. You know, the ones that were just affirmed by 2 witnesses or a notary, they then want to have those signatures be matched when they come in. So they tried to do this as a pilot project. It hasn't gotten off the ground because it's ridiculous and they haven't been able to find anybody to do this, but they did trying to do another bill this year to require it for the whole state. So, you know, you've got Georgia, which just I'm sure you've heard the stories about their oddly stacked elections board and the changes they are still trying to do, you know, 70 days before the election, the poor local elections administrators. But in Georgia, among that, a thing that you may not have heard about is they've now made it a requirement that all the ballots that are received by the end of the day before election day have to be counted by midnight on election day. You know, you know, which is like, what? Just a lot of issues where there is this ongoing attempt to make it more difficult, you know, and when you have to, you know, when you need people not to vote in order for you to win, or you think that's the case, you know, you're doing something wrong. Because, and I also have to say too, I know the story is, oh, it's good for Democrats and that's why Republicans fight it. The truth is, voting at home is just plain good for turnout. More people vote, certainly in the full vote at home states, right? Those have significantly higher turnout than the other states. But even when we have done multiple experiments where you take a bunch of people of similar like voter propensity scores, likelihood to vote, and you send half of them mail ballots and the other half you don't. The people who have the mail ballots, whether they asked for them or were asked, hey, would you like one of these? Oh, sure. They vote at rates like 10 to 20 points higher than people who don't get the mail ballots. I mean, it makes it easier, right? That's what it does. And the other thing is, there's actually not a partisan impact. Like in so much research from 2020 that the states that did vote at home, 5.8% percentage points higher turnout than the states that did, than if they had not done them. Really significant, very like academic research that I don't even quite understand how they do, but I know that they do it. But there's not a partisan impact. The only partisan impact is when one side says, yes, use mail ballots, and the other one says don't. Well, okay, then in that case, you might be able to say, oh, sure, more Democrats are doing it. But when it is a clean slate and you just send everybody the ballots, it's just that everyone votes more.
Yeah, I believe in 2020 or before 2020, a lot of Republicans did vote by mail, and primary users were older voters. Yeah,
older people
voters.
who tended to vote for Republicans. Yep.
Yeah.
Famously in Florida, the Republicans really made big hay, and that was the foundation of their activities in Florida for a long time.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep. Florida used to be a swing. Who remembers 2000 can tell you.
Yeah. Talk a little bit more about, I mean, we've talked, we know the impact is that you're going to have lower turnout if you don't have vote at home. What are some of the other impacts that come along with either having vote at home or not having vote at home?
Sure. I mean, when the more access to vote at home there is, the other really striking thing is young people. This really surprised us. We did some research, again, so much fodder from 2020 when so many more folks were voting at home. And we basically looked at the 18 to 34 turnout across all the states. And whether you count that turnout, that, you know, there's 2 different ways to count turnout. Turnout compare as a percentage of registered voters in the state and as a percentage of eligible voters in the state. And no matter which one you did, for registered voters, it was 6 of the 10 states with the highest 18 to 34 turnout. With eligible voters, it was 8 of the 15. were voted home states, and none of them were battlegrounds. So you are talking that of the 10 states with the highest turnout in 2020 among registered voters for 18 to 34-year-olds, 6 of them were voted home states. New Jersey had the highest 18 to 34 turnout. As it turns out, young people are used to having stuff come to them, right? They're all about Amazon and DoorDash. It makes sense to them that, well, sure, if something comes to me, yeah, you're making it easier to vote than to not vote. So having voted home increases turnout for young people. It helps to close the gaps, but not entirely. So we still have more work to do on that with historically disenfranchised voters, with Black voters, with Latino voters, with other voters of color. It helps to close those gaps. That's the other thing you find there. And again, with disabled voters, like if you look at the turnout rates in states that have made it easier to vote at home over the last 6 years, those rates of voting among disabled voters have gone up, and they have stayed flat or decreased in other states.
Yeah, that's amazing stuff. Now, let's talk about resources for voters.
Yes.
What kind of resources are we talking about here?
Sure. So, I mean, the most important thing is, when we have spent this year kind of just trying to get this information in front of folks. I don't care who you are organizationally. If you are doing any voter engagement work, make sure you know how you can vote at home in your state, and maybe use it as a way to do voter engagement. It's something you can do all year round. You don't have to wait until election time to ask people if they want to sign up to vote at home, because it's so much easier. It can be part of their voting plan. I just with that. But the link that was in the chat, that had that where the map is that I showed, yes. We have a tool on our website. We call it the How Americans Vote at Home tool, and it's kind of attached to that map. And you click on it, and it shows you every state and lots of details about the specifics of how you vote at home in that state. Starting with, is it universal? Is it excuse required? If it's excuse required, what are the excuses that are legal? What is the first date you can apply for mail ballots? What's the last date you can apply for them? Are there regulations on third party ballot collections? Can you, what are the deadlines for getting your ballot in? So that How Americans Vote at Home tool on our voteathome.org website is a great resource. So whatever state you're in or you're interested in, go there, click on the state, and it will give you all the information and more than you ever needed about what the rules are about voting at home in your state. And we also are interested in helping. If you have a plan, if you want to do it in a particular state, we'll help you with scripts. How do you train your folks to do it? How do you talk to voters about it? And we will provide you with that stuff. We've actually worked with Black Voters Matter in Florida to give them a bunch of resources in Florida in particular, and are working through them in a couple other states as well. But we've kind of completed that work in Florida and have given them a bunch of resources on that.
Awesome. I guess we've come to the point where we can open it up to Q&A. Do you have any final words you want to say before we do that?
No, I will add. So there's a question in the chat about signature verification. It's definitely been kind of a bone of contention. It's the whole balance of, you have to acknowledge that, you need elements to make sure they're secure, right? So many of the stories about fraud, let me back that up. 99.9% of the stories about fraud when it comes to mail ballots are completely made up. And if you know anything about how voting at home works, you know that. Stuffing ballot boxes, right? Oh yes, that is the great danger of ballot collection boxes, because they can be stuffed. Here's the deal. With mail ballots, every ballot is connected to an individual voter through a barcode. You can't photocopy those and stuff them, and make other copies and stuff them in, because they'll all be the same ballot, and they will accept the first one, and the rest of them will all get rejected. Numerous times you hear stories about people trying to vote twice. They vote by mail, and then they come in and try to vote in person, and you know what? They get caught, because our systems are built to catch that. So signature verification is part of that. When Oregon started, that was a foundational part of our security element. And I also fully acknowledge that It's an issue for younger people and older people, for some voters of color, about not having consistency in their signatures, and that being a potential barrier. So my response to that is, I think in general, I'm a believer in it. And I also acknowledge that we can and should be looking at other ways to do that, whether it is you put your last 4 digits of your social on, but some sort of verification to make sure that it is indeed you that is filling out that ballot. And I would say that curing process, the importance of curing and tracking is you will know if there's a problem. Colorado has really, you know, as an Oregonian, we take great pride in the fact that we were the first ones. And Colorado has really taken what we did and taken it up another level. They were the innovators of vote centers, which are now used in a lot of places, whether they have vote at home or not. Whereas instead of like, you can only vote at your precinct at this particular thing, you can vote at any of these vote centers in your county. And they'll all, you know, no matter where you're from, you can vote there. That was a Colorado innovation. You can bring your ballot there. You can decide you don't want to vote that mail ballot and you want to vote in person. Great, you go there and do that. They also have innovated something called text to cure, which is quite brilliant. And the idea is that if your ballot comes in and there is a signature issue, they text you and say, hey, we have this problem with your ballot. And you can text back a picture of yourself and a picture of your license and your ballot and attest, yes, that's my ballot. I signed that. Sorry if it didn't match. It might be messy, but that is the kind of like simple, good use of technology that, you know, is a great way to deal with that. So yeah, so I understand some of the concerns about signature verification. I still think it can be plenty useful, and we're very supportive of engaging in other in you know, providing and supporting other security measures.
Yeah, I know 2 of my signatures look alike, so. All right, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to come off mute or just drop
Yeah,
them on here, Mike.
Barbara. Yeah, Barbara, do you see any momentum, because you're close to this? Do you see any momentum? It seems to me that 4 years ago there were maybe 5 states that were 100%. So it looks like there's some positive movement in that regard. Maybe it was Utah that added, or a lot of the Western states.
Yeah.
But are you seeing any momentum toward making it easier to vote by mail in some places?
Yeah, I would say the most exciting things that have happened are a couple things. Number one, New York. New York last year went from an excuse required to no excuse. And that's huge because there's a lot of voters in New York. And we're really excited to work with them on moving them to single sign up and really being aggressive in making voting at home easier in New York. The New England states, historically, the thing is, much of their voting laws or policy is in their constitutions. And so it's much more challenging to do that. And as another part of that, Connecticut is the one place where we have an electoral engagement this year, because there is a legislative referral in the same way that 2 years ago, there was a legislative referral that was then passed by the voters, because that's how you have to amend the Constitution there. You have to pass it twice, 2 legislatures in a row, and then the voters pass it. 2 years ago, Connecticut voters agreed and passed early voting to allow early voting, because again, how you vote is in their constitution there. And on the ballot this fall in Connecticut is allowing no excuse, taking away the excuse required. So that's really exciting for us. And then there are a number of states. New Jersey, we're very excited about the prospect of getting them to full vote at home. In 2020, they did mail everybody ballots. And we've got a new, relatively new board member from there who's very engaged in that. And their Secretary of State is very interested in it as well. So that's good prospects. Maryland and Virginia both are strong prospects for moving to full vote at home. Arizona and Montana, you know, the states where there's such high usage, we're excited about the prospects there. But it really is, there's just, you know, if you look at that map, we are going to be plugging away. We have right now our main goals for next year for the excuse required states that we'd like to go to no excuse. Call me a cockeyed optimist, but it's Texas and Indiana are our two priorities for doing that. Part of what we are cautiously optimistic about is, this is like you said, this was a Republican thing before it was a Democratic thing. And the truth is, this is a democracy thing. This is a way to make it easier to vote for everybody. And so we are seeing that the Republican National Committee is encouraging people to vote at home. Even Trump, in between times that he says that it's a terrible idea, sometimes acknowledges again that it's a good thing to do. But we hope that one of the things that getting through this election will set to rest is that whole, as part of the myth and the falsehoods about it as a fraud, and instead the acknowledgement of this is a way to make it easier to vote, period.
I think, by the way, I want to correct one. I'm in Arizona. I couldn't figure out how to make that to everybody, but Arizona, more than 80% of the people vote by mail here. But there's one thing I think is really hypocritical. Originally, this was sold in Arizona as the Pebble, the permanent early voting list. And it's exactly as you said, once you sign up, you got it forever. Well, they came along and they said, well, we really didn't want all those people to vote. And so I tell you what, like with other states on registrations, if you miss I think it's 2 elections and you don't vote, now they call it the active early voting list. We were just kidding about the permanent part. And so now, so we have to encourage, we're out there actively. You have to encourage people to make sure to keep it up or you can lose that. One more comment that I think is significant. I love what you were saying, Barbara, about the family sitting around the table. You get a lot of things in the mail that are actually informative and reference materials. And to me, I think that is a realistic scenario where people can relax and compare notes and such. But I think one of the great benefits of voting by mail is not only the quantity, but the qualitative benefit that people pay more attention to the down ballot races. If you're in a hurry and you're standing up, you vote for president and Congress, et cetera.
Right. That's exactly right.
Like, for example, they have these lists of judges, and people will put out, there are some judges that they encourage you not to vote for, as an example, county attorneys, school boards. But a lot of these so-called lower level races really have an outsized impact on people's lives.
That's
and
right.
I think when people have the chance to relax at their dining room table, that you get more of an active engagement on that level and in those issues.
And you know what? If you like to vote in person, you can do all that research and then you can take your ballot with you and still go vote in person at the place. That's we talk a lot about people confusing kind of the nostalgia of, oh, the fall thing, you walk through the leaves, you're going and seeing your community at the voting place. Well, you can still do that. And ultimately, though, isn't it more important to make it easier for people to vote? It's the same way that people think about, like, voter registration on college campuses, because people will have this fantasy of college campuses as being full of 18 to 22-year-old white kids. That's not who they are anymore, right? The age range has increased. The diversity has increased. Many of those people are food insecure and other things. Many more of them are part-time, right? It is what's more important, making it so it's easier for folks, that to center the voter and make it easier for them and make it all come to them and make it easier. That's what's more important than the nostalgia of, oh, well, I've always done it this way. But you wouldn't believe the number of people, particularly in the democracy world, who are like, oh, but I love walking down to my voting place. I'm like, great, walk down to your voting place with your mail ballot and drop it, and drop it there. Peggy, you had
For
your
me,
hand up before.
I'm going, Peggy, please.
Questions. One is, you said that you work with people, that you have resources for people. So when you say the people, I'm in Arkansas. So when you say you work with us, so there would be an organization that would be getting together saying, we want to
anybody who's interested. Yep. If you came to me and said, okay, I want to figure out a way to encourage more people to vote at home here in Arkansas. First of all, I would say, okay, you have to be careful because it's an excuse required state. But let's look at what the excuses are. And if age is one of them, and I think it is in Arkansas, you can say, okay, here's how you could do this. Like, do a phone bank or something to voters who are over 65, and I can help you write you a script. And here's, we can look through the thing and find out, is that, is Arkansas a state where you can apply online for a mail ballot or not? Or can you have forms, whatever that is? Yep. Basically, anybody who is doing any sort of voter engagement, we can work with you and figure out how to best integrate that into the voter engagement that you're doing.
But it would need to be an organization, not just one person, right? Or would you help one person get started that?
We're easy. We're friendly. Like to me, I would just as soon have that there. And then, maybe you're that one person who ends up, being my on the ground advocate when we try to move Arkansas from, excuse required to no excuse. And we have enough resources that it's easy for us to that if you like as an individual would just reach out, we would respond and say, okay, here's what we have to start. Look at this and then tell me what else you need.
Okay, got it. Good.
Yeah.
And then you said that y'all are an automatic voter registration. What is it? What triggers it there?
So in Oregon, it is, they call it secure automatic voter registration now. We were the first state to do it. Whenever you interact with the DMV, with the Department of Motor Vehicles, whether you're getting a new title, whether you're getting a tag for that trailer that you're renting for a month or whatever it is, or you're getting your license or updating or renewing your license, you will get in the mail in the first week or 10 days after that interaction, a postcard, and it'll say, hi, hi, Peggy O'Neill. This is to inform you that unless you tell us otherwise, at the end of 30 days after that interaction with the DMV, you will be automatically registered to vote as a non-affiliated voter. So you can do a number of things. A, you can do nothing, and then you'll be registered as a non-affiliated voter. B, you can take this postcard and mark that you want to be a member of a party and send it back in, and then you'll be a member of that party. Or C, you can mark, I don't want to be registered, and send it back in, and then you won't be registered. So that has rocketed our voter registration numbers since we passed that in 2015, and it started in 2016. And now the next place we are trying to do that is with our state Medicaid office, our Oregon Health Plan. That is the next place we want to do that. We have passed it legislatively, so have a couple other states, but that federal government, everybody's HIPAA, right? HIPAA, the health insurance, health something, it's the privacy around healthcare information. And the feds are continually, tapping their fingers about, can we do this through Medicaid without violating HIPAA? So that has still not taken effect yet, either in Oregon or the other couple of states that have passed it. I'm very optimistic that it will. The Biden administration was working on it last year and just didn't quite get there. They wanted to do it before the presidential election year, but they didn't quite get there before the end of 23. So I'm hoping in 25 they'll make more progress on that, because really that's the really beautiful seamlessness. If you really my super radical thing is, I don't think you should have voter registration at all. I think everybody just should be able to vote. If you are 18 and, whatever, pick your age, I think you should just, be able to vote. Now, that's kind of a hard thing to manage, and I haven't really figured out all the administrative things about that. But the combination of automatic voter registration, where almost everybody is registered to vote, and then they are getting those ballots mailed to them, that's really, that combo really has a huge impact on having your voter, on the chance to have your voters be truly representative of the population. We also do a bunch of research. Our board chair, Phil Kiesling, one of the things that just, sets him off is basically the graying of the American electorate. If you look at turnout in primaries, and how many things are just decided in the primary, right? The average age of the voters is over 65. And yet that's not what the average age of people in the state or people in the country is. And so that the more you can do to broaden that base, to get the people voting that are going to be truly representative of the electorate, that's a really important thing to try to do.
Awesome. It's hard to believe, but we've
Amen,
gone
North
through
Dakota. I'm just
hour.
commenting on the thing that North Dakota doesn't have voter reg. Yeah.
Yeah.
You just need an ID. And that's the balance, right? Because lots of progressives are, they're opposed to voter ID. And I get that. But to me, if we could take away voter registration and instead all you need to vote is an ID, and you just sign up for a mail ballot or whatever it is, I would take that. I would take that if it meant, it was that much easier to vote.
Well, it's hard to believe that we've gone through a whole hour. with this. I thank you so much for
Oh,
joining us
my
tonight.
pleasure.
Again, tell people how to get in contact with you, how to find the resources. I know we've
Sure.
got a link up in the chat, so if you want to check that out, check
Yep,
that out.
just voteathome.org is the easiest place to go. We've got we have a research database. We have the How Americans Voted Home tool. We've got all sorts of good information. We have a scorecard. If you're curious about more specifics about what your state does and doesn't allow, you can check out our scorecard there, but it's all from voteathome.org. And I am BSW, which are my initials, or Barbara. It'll all get to me at voteathome.org. And yes, I want to call out Paul. I could not agree more. Yes, voter registration spread to limit minority voting. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's what, so many things in this country's history are tied to our attempts to, to minimize and oppress communities of color, particularly Black Americans.
Including all the drug laws, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you like what you've seen tonight, definitely go check out the website. Share it
Yeah,
on your social
thanks.
media. Share it out. That's the best way to get this information out to as many people,
Yeah.
that weren't here tonight, but would benefit from this information, that there is a group that is trying to increase our ability to vote from the comfort of our own homes, make more informed decisions, and
Amen.
definitely do that. Also share out the people.org for all the good stuff that we do as far as getting people the information they need to participate in their democracy. But again, thank you so much, Barbara. I really appreciate you joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
And you're doing
Fantastic.
great work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a joy.
Yeah.
And we do have this is part of a series. We'd like to come back to Sarah and let people know that we do have information about follow-on activities, that this is the first of the series. And so if Sarah could inform us.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Mike said, this is part of our Engage for Democracy project that we, as the Voting Rights Committee and some partnering organizations outside of the people, have been working on to get people really involved in every aspect of the election and voting ahead of the election in November. I am dropping in the chat a link if you've not had a chance to sign on for that. Make sure we get you all the information. We also have a bunch of stuff tied to that, sort of related, that we want to let you know about. And I am sending links in an email, so you don't have to frantically search the chat. But a couple of those things just to note to look out for. One, as I think David alluded to, we've been kind of compiling sort of some voter resources. The map and tool that Barbara mentioned is kind of the top of the list, one of those things, but also some different organizations that are putting together sort of, here are the things that have changed. So we want to make sure everybody has that ahead to be able to plan accordingly. So we'll include that. Our next event like this, the next Citizen Engagement Forum, where we're going to have a chance to hear from some different campaigns that are doing democracy-related ballot initiative work across the country, is going to be happening at the end of September, Thursday, September 26th. And all of that is happening through, as I mentioned, the Voting Rights Committee. And so if that interests you, I know a lot of you have been involved. If this is a time you kind of want to jump back in, our meetings are shifting a little bit. We're going to start meeting on Thursday starting next week. So I'm happy to get you all the information to participate in that next meeting on the 5th. I want to, again, thank you so much, Barbara, for giving us time. This is, every day is getting progressively busier as we barrel towards November. So we really, really appreciate you spending some time with us. As you know, we recorded this session and we will be sharing that. So if you know somebody that would really benefit from this information, we'll make sure that, you can get them that link so it's like they were here just a little bit later.
And two quick things for Barbara. Number one, sometimes the simple things are important. I was really won over to this whole process when I found out that they actually had the "I voted" sticker in the ballot envelope. Then I was okay with everything. But we do. Well, there was one other thing. Okay. Oh, yeah. A big part of what we did 4 years ago, we had some of us as individuals, and hopefully we'll do that again, going to the voter home, just people outside with their with their ballot ready to put in the mail with a big smile on their face, and just that simple act of, hey, I'm a happy citizen, excited to exercise my right to vote by mail. And so that's what we're trying to do with this series, is to find simple ways to connect with people and spread the joy of voting. Can't thank
That
you
is
enough, Barbara.
totally it.
Thank you
We're
so much.
we're gonna have our updated communications package out probably the week after Labor Day. So keep an eye out for that. We'll share it with you guys and please spread it widely.
That's great. Yeah, we absolutely will. Thanks so much. All right. Well, thanks for being with us, everybody. Hopefully we
All
see you all soon. Have a great night, a great Labor Day weekend,
Thanks so
and
much.
make sure you're registered to vote, however you do it. Thanks,
Thanks a
everybody.
lot.
Thanks, everybody.